Dear Frank Bidart, I found myself sobbing between the shelves at the library as I read Herbert White for the first time. I finished the poem and mumbled a curse word at my poetry teacher for recommending I study your work. To pick up a poem so casually and think, this can't hurt me. Sly, my professor didn't mention how devastating your poetry is, nor its Mondrian-like lineation. And to call these dramatic monologues, it sounds boring. You frequently craft an anti-hero persona in a poetry stripped of author's vanity. I see this in obvious examples like the Hours of the Night series, and you've been pressed during interviews for crafting narrative lines of sexual brutality. In the third hour of the night the speaker shares, I put the blood and sweat and mud inside her uterus until there was no trace of her. I heard you justify this tale of rape, murder, resurrection, and prophecy as derivative and sourced from a historic manuscript, and that the making of something is important to mankind. Our collective morality is subjective to each person's environment, and we have an innate ability to believe in our own rightness. Following this line of progressive logic, you often use poetry to critique its obvious and well-hidden flaws. This scene from the third hour of the night and the line, if the gods ever give you words one night in sleep you awake to find me above you, is chilling. Here is a man fueled by lack of power, which drives his curiosity and objectification of the woman's body to make her heart stop, then start, and ultimately stop again, is godlike, and reminds me of the mythological La Loba and Women Who Run with the Wolves, where power and control is conferred to a dominating figure, standing above another as collector of bones, with the power to resurrect and possess the body. Of course, La Loba is presented as a sympathetic feminine construct of women's reclamation of power. In the least flattering reading, La Loba is empowered by the same ability as your crafted man. Vocal possession occurs as her song is sung by the wolf she resurrects into puppets. While your poem's God has the power to choose the hour of another's death, La Loba gives life to ventriloquism. I link sonic possession as a kind of death in this comparative analogy. I think back to that Bidart line of progressive logic. The fallacies we believe as empowering, and our desire to make things. How frightful it must have been to write and display Herbert White as your first poem in your first published book, to craft a villain as an ordinary human, formed by consequence and good intention, making monsters real, to investigate their cognitive development of action, empathy, and logic is important. As you said in a reading with the Library of Congress, this is an attempt to show a human being's necessary drive to resolve conflicts and to show what happens without any of the helps that culture, education give one. Since that poem, I've read through your entire collection up until watching the Spring Festival and look forward to Metaphysical Dog once the pandemic lifts and libraries reopen. Many times I've cussed at you, certain these poems were true confessions and not persona. This is especially true in the arc when the speaker writes, "The solution was to forget that I ever had an arm." This line is telepathic itself into the disabled experience, but then you maneuver into the deepest truth that I know. Then, after about 2 weeks, imperceptibly, everything I saw became cardboard, even the things I touched. I couldn't allow myself to remember. Wearing a body, forgetting its identity, reforming oneself from what it is missing, leads to such a loss of ability to connect with anything at all. It's part of the healing acceptance process, and I wonder, how did you know this? Does Frank Bidart have all his limbs? But as the poem says, insanity is the insistence on meaning. I don't know how or why you write these persona poems so well, but it doesn't matter. I've heard you say that by writing outside of the self, either through persona or even to yourself, allows for poetic freedom and discovery. However, I don't think you nailed Ellen West as much as the press believe you did. It reads as a romanticized version of an anorexic girl, a bit too fanciful. Yes, you hit all the points and have one of the most stellar lines I've ever read. Trying to stop my hunger with food is like trying to appease thirst with ink. But the poem lacks an anorexic's drive for power. Yes, the sterility mentioned is there, but what about the punishment, the peace that comes from control through self-denial, and the love of that? In later works, you talk about creating subtlety, particularly in the poem In Memories of Joe Bernard. This shift in tone and technique is noticeable and splendid, an act of restraint. I also see in Valentine, which contains rhymes which were at first imperceptible, now so obvious. Perhaps the quiet craving for control in Ellen West is best shown in the dinner scene when she watches lovers feed each other with contempt and fascination. By the time I read Ellen West, I was prepped for poetry displaying rage and wit, but your collection seemed to refine over time into the art of subtlety. Maybe. You spoke about your mother's and your distaste for the seedy nature of Los Angeles, and I think that culture of crime, sexual objectification, and abuse is quite prevalent throughout California. You were born in Bakersfield and named your first collection Golden State, while opening with a poem about a rape murder of a young girl by a necrophiliac who fucked a goat. It's easy to laugh at this as absurd and probable, but I find this combo to be a perfect metaphor for California and its ability to charm inhabitants with false narratives about dreams and decency, all while quite evil things are common, close, and accessible. You couldn't have made a more sardonic and apt title for your first book, subtle but blaring. The Bidart poetry paradox I've come to read lies between what is taught and what is truth. That debased actions are evil stereotypes belonging to the movie world isn't a true locality. These actions are in suburbs, cities, acres of farmland, squinting into the sun, and within our very own families, and due to an access or lack of psychological resources and sustenance. As the poem By the Water so beautifully illustrates, sexual depravity, desire for connection, and debasement is quite a sacred and common ritual. Perhaps if we weren't raised with religious brimstone, shame, and narratives of failure and success, then these violent acts would be less traumatic and dangerous. This is a circular way of saying your poem's prototype of empathy-driven investigation into typically open and shut judgment calls. Like you say, confession isn't about making oneself look good. However, I think with the goal of illuminating the humanity within deeply flawed characters, we can uncover that thing which makes us think harder and find ways into each other's psychologies and emotional centers and its causes of malfunction. If we can do that, then that's one step towards meeting society and addressing societal issues rather than steamrolling over them and perpetuating the alienation which gives rise to desperate pleas for acceptance, which I think all the speakers in your poems are ultimately in search of. Beyond thematic approaches, and I must wrap up now, your technical style has been liberating. Long lines, languid or precise, loud and delicate, like no other, at times and boldly defies logic, syntax, grammar, punctuation, yet I found myself not wanting it any other way. Like I said, not a lot of poetry floors me, but from time to time I've been crushed and resurrected by your poems. Best wishes, Michelle Laforie.